So I wrote a lot about this as it was happening, and I am definitely responsible for boring a lot of people with this particular situation, especially those that are close to me and that see me on a somewhat regular basis. Um, but I still decided to kind of sit down and just talk about this for a few minutes because I think it's important for a litany of reasons, really. But it certainly warrants a video of some kind, given the level of bystander engagement I had with the whole thing. Um, Nick Land's recent tweets, especially those pertaining to Mark Fisher. For those of you who don't know, recently, I think it was in the patch notes for the new Claude AI model, um, it said that it was going to. I'm putting this in layman's terms. I'm avoiding any sort of technical jargon, anything of the sort, just because I want this to be thorough but accessible. Um, Claude basically started to, or rather, with the version that was coming out, Claude was going to favor the writings, ideas, and input of the late Mark Fisher, um, the man who wrote Capitalist Realism, Ghosts of My Life, the intro to Acid Communism, the book that he never got a chance to finish, and was also a part, and sort of an integral part of the CCRU, mm, alongside alongside Nick Land back in the day. So Claude is favoring Fisher's ideas, Fisher's writings, and I guess the upcoming model was heavily trained to include, I guess, some of the more accessible um, Fisherian quote unquote ideas. And Nick Land, tweeting under the name Xenocosmography nowadays, didn't really wasn't really a fan of that. And the hey Claude, I wrote you, but you still ain't calling memes aside. Um, it was really funny to watch this public crash out unfold for a couple of reasons. Um, the first one is that we don't really see Land talking about or writing about Fisher all that much. Not in his formal writings, his books, and also not on Twitter. He just doesn't really engage with this stuff. And I gotta say, after he engaged with not just Fisher, but this whole, sphere that came out of that was kind of birthed out of Fisher's work, I can kind of see why he didn't do that. He didn't, because it feels like a minefield, especially for someone like him. Um, I gotta say that the Fisher sphere, mm, is about as annoying as all of those people that, um, on every you know birthday, or the anniversary of Mark's death or whatever, would bring up um, the vampire's castle because they are in dire need of affirming their idea that Mark is this, or Mark was this, excuse me, this reactionary figure that was and still is, in terms of legacy, very much beyond saving, which is just not the case, and that's really fucking stupid. I cannot see why anyone with a functioning brain would even begin to think in that sort of direction. That's really dumb, and no one should engage with. I don't think it's a worthwhile engagement with Mark or his work or even his legacy. Right? That's that's stupid. One bad Russell Brand take doesn't um, doesn't make him out to be an inherently flawed individual or like an inherently flawed thinker. That's just not the case. Even in Vampire's Castle, there's still a lot of concepts and notions and ideas that are worthwhile and should be kind of looked at as such, regardless of the whole Russell Brand thing. And even beyond that, he was much bigger than that one piece of writing. So it's just lazy intellectual work. Um, but anyway, so this whole thing happened, and Land was uh, kind of forced to talk about uh, Fisher because um, he, uh, I guess, is in love with with Claude, and his whole idea was he came out swinging and was like um, his the fact that he chose to end his life, he being Fisher in this case, um, basically tells you everything you need to know. That's his message. It's over. The "it's over" bit, I guess, is referring to contemporary leftism and the remnants of Fisher's thought. Kind of felt like a dumb jab, like a soft diss or whatever. That's true, and I don't agree with what he said there. I think it's misplaced, and it's not the case. It's never really over, especially for something as timeless as some of Mark's work. Um, but yeah, a lot of people just kind of piled on, and he kept doubling down, being like, you know, Land tried putting, I would argue, more weight on the suicide than the inherent like flaws to Fisher's ideas, which was kind of dumb. It felt like he was operating from more of like a personal um disposition, which is fine. It's just kind of antithetical to Land and what he's about, and also just something, if you've been following his Twitter for any length of time, that's something you're not really used to from him. I don't think that was something people expected. Um, but it was an emotional reaction nonetheless, right? Nothing wrong with that. It just felt kind of out of character, but given their friendly rivalry, non-hate relationship at least, and that history, that's not really surprising when you take all of it into account, right? Um, and yeah, there was some discourse happening with people calling Land petty. Oh, if it were the case that Claude was favoring your writings, you wouldn't be writing like any of this. Um, and if you were used as this kind of source of referential knowledge instead of Fisher, you wouldn't have anything to say about this, which I don't think is the case. Land doesn't strike me as the type of guy that would really care. Um, re his own recognition. He just doesn't operate at that level, I think. Um, and then one of the last things he said with regards to the whole thing after this like multi-day long kind of sort of crash out. He said he replied to someone's tweet being like, um, I said some things I shouldn't have, and I'm aware of that, especially during the last couple of days with regards to this whole thing. But I'm still mad at him for what he did, and that's, I mean, it's powerful for a lot of reasons. Um, Again, not something you would expect from someone like Nick fucking Land, but also it makes perfect sense. Again, given this history, given this sort of friendship, given this camaraderie, it's very much apparent if you look at how Fisher looked at Land through the years and how he approached his work, even after their sort of split. There was a there was a clear admiration there, and also I think Mark even gave a lecture. It was like towards the end of his life. I think I remember hearing a recording of it somewhere on SoundCloud or something like that, where it was basically a lecture about Nick Land and his work. He gave this lecture at when he was working at Goldsmiths, and he outright said that looking at Land as purely a fascist and using that to kind of dismiss his disposition, no matter how right wing it may be, and no matter how on the right he may be perceived to be, or he, you know, thinks he is. Um, to just kind of call it fascism and call it a day would be a flawed approach. It would be wrong. And he was one of the the handful of people on the sort of intellectual kind of academic left, even though Fisher was very much, despite being a part of the academy, he was always kind of an outcast there. He was always kind of on the outer edges of academia and all that. He still very much engaged with Land on the basis of what he said, not on the basis of this sort of perceived atmosphere of him being this um, impenetrable kind of Nazi adjacent person or whatever. Uh, there's always been more to Land, and he's always been misunderstood in that sense. And I think even Fisher himself thought of it like that. It was a very weird situation and like a very weird tweet chain to witness. If for no other reason, because again, no one really expected that from Land. Um, but it makes sense because he, not to sound like a fucking, what are those people called, shippers? Not to sound like a like a shipper, but dude clearly misses his friend, and that's something I can relate to very much so. Missing people is hard, and it never really leaves you. You can feel better. You can, um, you know, take the necessary steps to kind of fill the void or whatever. But you can never revert back to how it was with them because they are quite literally just not there anymore. So yeah, I understand, and I think that what was also kind of weird, and I didn't expect this from Twitter people. Um, he when he wrote that, a lot of his detractors and people who are in heavy disagreements with him understood his position. Like as soon as he opened up, quote unquote, um, a lot of the Twitter sphere people were like, "Hey, I get it. It was kind of stupid to word it like that, but I I understand." Land was no stranger to criticizing the left. Neither was Mark. I think that's apparent by this point. But Land's critiques were always like their saliency was their the perception of them being salient was buried under this notion of, oh, he's just a Nazi, therefore anything he may say with regards to the academic left or the left more broadly should be or must be dismissed. Um, Fisher kind of had an in with these people, even though he was also considered reactionary in some circles. Just kind of dumb. I can't really, he was always riffing about reactionary thought being the the literal devil, like the antichrist of intellectual labor. So I don't know why he's continuously being lumped in with reactionary people, but it is what it is. You can't really expect an like a wholly structural analysis of um, of another person's work, especially on a place like Twitter. So, and that's probably the most reactionary sentiment of them all. But it is what it is. You can't do much about it. Anyway, yeah, these are kind of my closing thoughts on this whole thing, and if for nothing else, it's for archival purposes. Free flowing this, I'm not even gonna edit none of it. Fuck that. I'm just putting it out there. Thank you all so much for listening, and take care.